Hi everybody, it's Nick. I wanted to talk today in particular about grief, mortality, death, and a massive part of that is life. So my philosophy on life is a little bit that it's a series of lessons that we either turn up to or we don't. And I think that the way we operate, particularly in the westernized world, is, I know I've done this through large parts of my life, is I've spent a lot of time bunking off the lessons and not turning up. But I do believe that the universe will keep repeating that lesson until you do turn up and you do face it. And the more you put it off, the harder that lesson gets. And one of the biggest lessons I think in life is death. And it's the lesson we all have to turn up for, whether we like it or not. It is the most it's the most finite, the most mandatory, and possibly the hardest lesson that we have to do. And because we spend so much of our life avoiding the uncomfortable truths, avoiding suffering, running away from things that scare us and so forth, I think in its own way that makes death a lot more difficult. And the other thing I find is that when something as big as death comes along, one of the things I've observed, and I do it myself and I see other people doing it, is that we intellectualize everything. We allow our thinking mind to try and solve everything. Everything's a problem, isn't it, that requires a solution. Well, actually, you can't solve death. It's not a solvable thing. It is going to happen. The only question is when and how. Sorry, that's two questions: when and how. So therefore, we have to allow our feeling mind to become far more present. And I do worry that one of the things we've done in life is we've allowed our thinking mind, which is our intellect, and it's also, I think, pretty much where our ego hangs out, to take control, to be the driver of our life. Mark Manson talks about this in his books. And actually the thinking mind really should be the navigator, not the driver, and the feeling mind should be the driver. And when I talk about feeling mind, I talk about our instincts. And we do need to learn to tap back into our instincts. I think it's especially important when we're facing really challenging circumstances, really difficult lessons in life. And one of the things I remember quite acutely is when my brother-in-law was dying. He has passed away now. He died from motor neuron disease, and he was ill for quite a few years beforehand. And during that period, I had postnatal depression, and I was taking antidepressants to help with that. And I was also spending a fair bit of time overseas with my sister and her husband, which is where they lived. And as it got towards the end, I remember I'd been on the antidepressants 6 months or so, saying to my doctor, and I think it was actually just after my brother-in-law died, that I wanted to come off them, which might seem a bit mad. Intellectually, your thinking mind would say, "Oh, now's not the time, because you're going to go into a difficult period. You're going to be grieving. You're going to actually need some help." But actually, my feeling mind, my instinct told me now was exactly the right time. And I'm really lucky actually that I've got such an open-minded GP who gets that, because my feeling mind was telling me that I was, I'm losing somebody who I loved and who had been a big part of my life, and I wanted to feel that. I wanted to feel that loss, and I wanted to feel that grief, because that was part of the process, that was part of my journey. And that if I didn't feel that loss, and if I didn't feel that grief and that sadness, then it wouldn't be expressing all of the love that I actually had for my brother-in-law. It would be suppressing it. And somehow that felt really, really wrong. It felt really wrong to suppress it. So I did make the decision, and that was actually when I came off antidepressants after postnatal depression. And yes, I was very sad. And it was a very sad set of circumstances. My responses were very normal, were very reasonable. They were reasonable responses to very sad and very difficult circumstances. And I have never ever regretted that decision. That I went with my instinct rather than my intellect. My instinct was I wanted to feel. I absolutely wanted to feel, and I wanted to, because once somebody's died, I think the other thing I've observed is that you know, when they're here, you can express your love to them in a human form because they're another human being and they're with you. But when they're not here anymore, you can't express it in a human form. And grief kind of feels like it's the first stage of still being able, of still feeling and finding a way in the unknown of how you can still feel and connect with that person who was a love in your life. And that grief is an incredibly important part of that process to find a way to still stay connected. And you know, the same happened with my father. With my father, the grief was incredibly acute, really acute, and I did need some help, and I did medicate for in the initial aftermath because it was so acute. I was so overwhelmed by it, and I couldn't hold it together. But even that was not my intellect. Even that was my feeling mind. That was my feeling saying, "There's just it's just a tsunami. I can't actually stand up in it." And then, you know, after a period of time, my feeling was I'm okay. I need to feel this grief now. I need to really feel it and embrace it. And of course, it wasn't easy, and it's not easy now. You know, I think about my dad now, and I still tear up because, you know, I'm still incredibly sad, and I still miss him, and I still wish he was here. But you know, he's not. He's dead, and everybody does die. That is part of life. There's no point avoiding that conversation. And when I got to that stage, you know, instinctively, my feeling mind told me that it was again a massive part of the process that I had to go through, and the lesson that I had to turn up to in life was to feel and experience that grief over my dad, and to find a way of, I suppose, understanding how that was going to, you know, be part of my life going forward, and how I was going to weave it into my life, and how I was going to continue my life without him, and what was that going to look like, and without the grief, without actually allowing myself to feel those feelings. I would have just been in denial, and I would have carried on living a very, very, very superficial life with very little meaning. And that's the real paradox here. That's the real irony. You know, death and grief is our biggest lesson. It is also the one that teaches us the most. It is also the one that liberates us the most, because it liberates us from judgment. It liberates us from things that aren't important. And it also brings a great depth of meaning to our life, because we start to truly understand you know, what it really means to love and what it really means to lose. And when we say, you know, the rhetoric of, you know, that's important, this actually really manifests that that's important. And I guess that's what I wanted to say is I really, I think we should start avoiding the uncomfortable stuff, because we will always get delivered the most uncomfortable lesson in the world, which is death. And if we avoid the steps along the route to that, which come to us in various different forms for whatever our journey is, I think we're just making life harder for ourselves in the long term. You know, suffering, discomfort, loss, grief, challenges, rejection, failure, these are all part of our journey that have to be embraced and have to be faced. And the last point I wanted to make is, you know, I think intellectually, when our thinking mind comes into play, we naturally want to step in and want to help someone, want to solve it for them. And what I've definitely found, sorry, my dogs are just arguing behind me. Stop it. Kids aren't here, so the dogs are arguing instead. I've definitely found that it's important to sit with people in the discomfort. It's important to be there. It's important to show love. It's important to show care. But it's really important not to hinder or divert their journey. So it's not always about solving somebody's discomfort and somebody's pain. I think really it's just about sitting in that discomfort and pain with them, to hold their hand while they find their way through, because we're all on our own journey, and that's a really important process for us. So that's sent with lots of love, in the hope that it's of help to somebody somewhere. Take care. Bye.